Hey everyone, welcome back to the Anderson Bros Outdoors. I'm Jake, and today we're going to talk about this. This being the Axial Basecamp. Sure, you can notice here we have the chassis laying on the table, we have some Hyraxes on it, and we have the original wheels and tires over here. I was originally asked to do a Rock Pirate build with the Basecamp, so that's exactly what I did. Today, I'm going to go over that as well as a review of the truck before and after. My original intent for this build was to do it as stock and cheap as possible. However, things took a little bit of a turn, but it's not something that you have to do at home. It's just something that I did personally, and you'll see what I'm talking about here very shortly. Let's get into the review portion of the before, and then I'll go over everything that I've done, and then we'll do a review of after. As I stated before, I really like this remote. It does have an auxiliary option, which could be used as a winch, right? So realistically, I think that is a fantastic feature. I'm pretty sure that I was not very satisfied with this remote in the fire team video, but I've since changed my mind. I think we're allowed to do that, right? Maybe? Okay, maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, I've changed my mind. I do like this remote for crawling. So it does have a lot of nice functionality to it. So right out of the box, you're going to probably want to turn the steering adjustment all the way up so you can get a lot more steering left and right. The truck itself, bumpers get hung up on everything. You're going to want to take those off or replace them or do something with them. The front bumper is pretty good. Actually, it's not terrible. It does suck up nice and close to the body, and it is able to do a lot of arrival angles or approach angles, if you will. It's the departure or the rear bumper that sucks the most. It sticks out real far and it hangs on everything. Other than that, I don't really have any issues. The motor is actually it's pretty good for an RTR. Honestly, I was very impressed with the ESC and the motor and the servo. The servo is, again, adequate. It beats the Phoenix RTR. Both the motor and the servo beat the Phoenix RTR, both in controllability and power-wise. And then they also beat the TRX4. So the TRX4 servo, well, all TRX4 servos suck. This servo beats the TRX4 and the Phoenix RTR, hands down. The motor's probably on par with the TRX4. I would say out of the box, the TRX4 is actually pretty good. So it only makes it better if it's a 2-speed. That's really the only thing that it has in terms of electronic. Now we can get into the body. Like I said, the front bumper is decent. The back bumper I would get rid of immediately or replace. About everything on this truck I would replace with the exception of the axles and the transmission and the radio. I mean, there's 3 or 4 things that I would keep, and those are those things. The tires, I was not impressed with the tires at all. You can see in the review that we did the shootout between the stock TRX4 Sport, the stock Phoenix RTR, and the stock Axial Basecamp. The Basecamp did a lot better than I had expected. It was about on par with the TRX4 in some scenarios, and I think that it would have been pretty level with the TRX4 if it weren't for these tires. These tires suck. They're really hard, and the foams are really hard, and the rubber, while it does feel like it would be a good compound, it feels like it'd be a good compound for a heavier truck. So it's really stiff, and this truck is super light, so I don't feel like these stock wheels and tires get the job done. Those are really all of the complaints that I have. Again, the truck did impress me. You've seen that in the review. Again, the purpose of this truck was to do the build. So I didn't change anything with the receiver, so I'm going to move that along. I did, however, update the chassis, right? So you can see here the rear bumper sticks out way far. The front bumper is tucked real close to the tires. So I pretty much just removed the steering servo that was here. I also removed the front body mount. I removed the transmission. And ironically, when you remove the sliders from the chassis actually breaks apart. So it's actually a 2-piece C-channel chassis. So I did remove the sliders, which in turn removed the motor and the transmission and the skid. And the skid itself actually houses the motor and the transmission, and it also houses all of the links. So once you pull off this middle section or the skid section, I mean, it's pretty much, you just have to disconnect the shocks and you're off to the races. The only other thing that I removed was the rear body mounts as well. The stock frame isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the entire purpose of this build was to shove a Rock Pirate chassis frame into it or into the truck. You can see I still have retained the stock body. All of the parts that I have designed and printed, I will have on Thingiverse. So the link is down below to both Thingiverse and the location directly to all of the printed parts needed for this. With that being said, you can see the body has been used a little bit. It is beat up. I did throw these Hyraxes on here. They are right out of the package. They are G8 compound. They're still using the stock foams. I have not touched them. They're plastic wheels. Like I said, this truck is super light, so it barely gets any flex out of the tires. If you were to do a side hill attempt, I mean, you can see that's not even, I mean, I'm pushing down on it there, and it's, I mean, that's how light this truck is. Anyway, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the video. You can see this pretty blue Rock Pirate chassis, very pretty. And you can see that there are a lot of changes here. I'm gonna hold this up so you can see it and we'll talk about it. So the rear spacer is the same spacer I used for the Phoenix RTR. The front spacer and servo mount is printed. It is, again, the same servo mount that I used for the Phoenix RTR. So I didn't really need to do anything there. I did make some L brackets for the back so we could mount the body, and I made a bracket for the front so we could mount the stock body up front, and it actually also ties into the shocks, so you don't have to put nuts on the screws there. I did have a file previously for a 3-gear transmission to flip the motor around, and you can see that I have a Holmes Hobby revolver here, and it is flipped around. So originally I was going to keep the stock electronics, so I was going to keep the stock motor and ESC. I just couldn't contain myself. I couldn't not do this, so I did it. This is not a requirement for this build. You can use the stock motor. It'll stay in the same position. You cannot use this mount with the stock motor and this chassis. The motor will hit the chassis rail and you will not be able to utilize it. So the motor does have to sit in like this, just like it would from the factory. Again, I did this to just kind of play around and see just how light I could make the truck, while at the same time seeing just how capable it is, right? Or it could be. Moving on, we have the 3D printed rear spacer. We have the 3D printed servo mount. We have the body mounts that's 3D printed in the rear, and then the body mount printed in the front. We're still using the stock posts and mounts in the front and the rear, so the body does slide on and off just like it would from the factory. If I can find there we go, just like that. It slides on and off just like that. I'm still using the stock servo, still using the stock skids. Here's some things that I did have to do to the stock components. So the stock servo, I had to clip the servo mounts because there is a little bar under the servo. Basically, there's a little bar between the two screws on the side that goes down, and so it rests kind of like this. You do have to trim that up in order for the servo to sit flat. I had to cut those off, and then I did have to trim. I had to trim the sliders, right? So you just cut the rear L portion of the slider, you trim it up, and then you cut it off as needed, and you can see it's probably about 3/4 of an inch that I sliced up there. And once you do that, you can screw them right into place. For the front of the slider, you can either cut the front portion off, or you can just simply remove 1/8 inch of the inside. So it does sit on the frame rail like this. You will have to remove 1/8 inch of material on the inside of the mount in order for it to slide down there and re-screw it. I will link Thingiverse for this. Just a disclaimer, I did not build this piece. This piece was already designed and I downloaded it. I don't remember the author, but I will give them a shout out in the description below with the link. Whoever you are, thank you much. Other than that, it's pretty much the stock truck. It does have the Rock Pirate chassis. I'm using the stock shocks. I did turn the shocks around, so that requires you do have to pull the ball joints out of the shock and then flip the shock and then put the ball joints back in place. I also removed the shock, or the spring seat, if you will, so that way it sits a little lower and I have more lower center of gravity. I'm not sure how I like it. I'm just testing different things out, if you will. For the steering, so the steering, the Rock Pirate chassis comes with a metal panhard mount. You will have to unscrew both the panhard bar, so you have to make it a little longer. I don't know how much longer, probably like 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. But you will have to make it slightly longer, so you'll need to unscrew it some, and then you also need to unscrew the steering bar here. So you'll need to do the same thing for it. Otherwise, the chassis sits too close to the passenger side and it does hit this shock. Other than that, I didn't have to do anything else. right? I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 printed parts and the chassis, and we're pretty much off to the races. So realistically, you spent, we'll just say $390 on the truck. You spend another $75 on the chassis. That is $465. So you're up to $465 for the truck and the chassis, right? You print out these parts or have somebody print out these parts. That's another maybe 10 to 15 bucks at the most. This uses very minimal filament. You can buy a roll of filament for 20 bucks. We'll just add another 20 bucks to it. So you're looking at $485 for the truck as it sits. Obviously, you're not going to get the ESC and the motor that I have in here. You would use the stock ESC and motor, but you would have a very capable rig for just under $500. I would also throw in a set of these Hyrax tires. So you're looking at another 60 bucks there. So 485, you're looking at we'll just say 545, plus you're going to want to add some knuckles, some brass knuckles up front. We'll just say that's another 50 bucks. So what's that? 595. And then I would buy the overdrive gears for the front as well. So that puts you around the 630-ish, 630 or 640 territory. We'll say 650. So all said and done, with the stock motor and stock electronics, what I would do is I would skip the Holmes Hobby revolver. I would skip the ESC. I would buy the Hyraxes with these plastic wheels. I would buy a set of brass knuckles for the front or portal covers for the front. And I would also buy a set of portal overdrive gears. And so with all of those things, I think that this truck would be a phenomenal truck. You can get 35% overdrive gears in the front for, I don't know, like 35 or 40 bucks. For the portals, I would absolutely do it all day, every day. If you're just wanting to trail the truck, then I would just leave it as it sits. I would buy the truck, get the chassis, throw it all in there, leave the stock electronics, and leave the stock tires and run it. I mean, you don't even need the chassis for a trail truck. I would change the tires. Like I said, these are less than stellar. I am definitely not impressed with them in the least. So I would add tires, but that's just me. So overall, how I feel about the truck now, I did take it out and I did run it. And I will tell you that, like I said, the truck is extremely light. As a matter of fact, I'm going to weigh it real quick. So it weighed right at 4 pounds, which is crazy. I mean, it doesn't even feel like it's 4 pounds. It feels less than that. Overall, I am impressed with the truck. It wasn't able to make some of the climbs some of my other trucks make, but the other trucks also have a lot more weight to them. They also have a lot more weight in the front. Realistically, I think this truck does very good for what it is. So overall, am I happy with it? Absolutely. I don't think I'll do anything else to it besides get some brass for the front. I might actually take it to a competition and attempt to enter it. I don't think that I'll be able to enter for good points, but I would like to at least run it through some gates to see where it's at. I'll use the stock body. I'll leave it with the bumpers off and see just what it does compared to other trucks that are purpose built. Because at this point, I've got next to no money in comparison into it. I might even put the stock electronics back in it, the stock motor, and see, the only reason I didn't put it in there is because I couldn't put the motor forward facing. If I was able to put the motor forward facing, the stock stuff would still be in there. But I wanted to give this a shot again to see how light I could make it and see how capable it was being light. I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. Again, I will leave a link to the website in the description below with this build. I'm going to put what it has on it and then what I'd recommend. Again, it's not anything that you have to do at home, just my personal preference. I'm going to call it here. Look out for the video coming soon where I do some raw runs with it. If you made it this far, thank you. We really appreciate the support. Please like and subscribe, share the video, and have a good day. job there. Give it a shot. I guess it will.